All right guys, so today is finally the day that we're gonna go ahead and install the Holley CAN IO module. So if you guys don't already know, a lot of people are really happy about this. It's basically an expansion for your inputs and outputs for either your Terminator X or your Holley HP, which gives you a little bit closer to what a Dominator has for inputs and outputs. Now, not nearly as many, but you get an additional 8 inputs and 8 outputs for this thing. So we're gonna run through it real quick on how easy it is to install and how to set it up in the ECU. Now yours probably isn't gonna look like this. This one's got a sweet sticker on there. You can't quite see what it is, but this one has Dirt Floor Fab sticker on it. It's got a YouTube channel. Dude was super nice. We ordered our module and there was a mix up with which ones Holley sent out first. So even though we ordered ours really early, Zeth over at Dirt Floor Fab got his first, but he wasn't gonna use it for a while and we wanted to get it in so that we could do some racing coming up. So he sent his out to us so that we could install it. And then we're gonna send ours back to him once we get it. So huge shout out to Dirt Floor Fab. I'll put his name down here or up there somewhere. And yeah, go check out his channel, subscribe, watch some videos. He's got some cool projects going on. Okay, so far the installation of this looks pretty freaking straightforward. So this big plug right here is what actually goes to the module that we're installing. Has a bunch of things already pinned, and as you can see in there, there's a bunch of open pins. The instructions tell you what those pins are for, whether it's 5-volt output or 5-volt input, or whatever. Each of them have a purpose, and you just have to look at the instructions and pin it accordingly. But to get the module itself working is super easy. So it has 2 of these CAN plugs here, one in, one out, basically. So this has to plug into the CAN plug for your ECU. So there's a CAN plug that goes to your ECU. And the reason why you got a male and female there is because if you have a dash, that's plugged into that CAN right now. Well, so what you do is you unplug that side, goes to the ECU, and the other side goes to your dash, acting like a pass-through. So that way it's still operating your dash, but it's also operating with this new module. Last wire is just this big honking wire, which is the ground for the module itself, as well as any of the sensor grounds that you're going to be using in the future. So all of these black wires here get grouped up into that one big black wire, and that's what provides the ground for any of the sensors that you wire through here. Yeah, so really easy. Just main ground wire there, CAN in and out, and then the main module plug right there. So let's go ahead and slap this in real quick. All right, so I heard somebody saying the other day they were complaining about the fact that you had to actually pin these. And so Holley gives you a bunch of pins and some plugs, and then it even has the little eyelet for that main ground that we were looking at a second ago. But in addition to that, it has a bunch of these bags labeled input, output, and ground. They give you a boatload of these real nice wires, and what I didn't realize until I actually took one of these out was that they're also already pinned on one side. So literally all you have to do is open up the connector, which is super easy on this style of connector, shove that in there, close it back up, and then run your other wire to the sensor that you're trying to do. So, I mean, they make it really easy. This is nice. Nicer than I thought it was gonna be. So I bought a bunch of wire and everything getting ready to do this. I didn't realize it was gonna come with all this. All right, so I'm not gonna go through the specific act of wiring. Honestly, the diagram that Holley gives is really straightforward. It tells you exactly what pins do what, and I just want to show you kind of how the diagram translates to what you actually configure in the ECU. So there's a couple things that I like. It's pretty straightforward in here as well, but there's probably only one thing that I don't like, but let me just go through. So the first thing that we did was the rear speed, and that's using the Motion Raceworks drive shaft speed sensor. It's a regular old Hall effect. This is a scenario where I provided power and ground. We used to have this sensor going into the regular ECU before I screwed up one of the input ports and couldn't leave it there anymore. So the power and the ground for the sensor is currently run off of the sensor ground and the sensor power for the main ECU. So I'll show you here in a second if you were to want to send power and ground via this module, but this is solely just gonna show us the input portion of doing this sensor with the CAN module. First things first, just name your input. So right here, we're doing rear speed. and then click enable, and it gives you the ability to go ahead and configure. Let me get offline real quick so that I can actually show you. So this drop-down menu, previously, like if you're doing it directly into the ECU, you would be selecting digital speed frequency right here. But when you upgrade to the newest version of version 6, which is I think build 200, this might also be available in the first one, but I didn't even actually look. I upgraded before we actually got this module in the car. So now you see there's CAN options available here. So what we're going to do is select the CAN digital speed frequency. So same exact thing as this, but you're telling it I want to do it via the CAN module. So come over here and click configure, and then you will fill out kind of your basic speed sensor stuff. So this is all the same as it was before. Choose whether you want it to show RPM, rotations, frequency, whatever you want to show in here. We want to show miles per hour, because we're going to be comparing this to miles per hour of our front wheel speed sensor eventually to do some traction control stuff. Then you come down and you do all of your pulses to average. It, I guess, depends on the cleanliness of your signal. A lot of times if I put 0 or 1, it ends up with a pretty jagged signal. So to smooth that out, we average a couple of those points. So this is a 16 point. That's going to be the number of points on your, it's points per rotation, I guess. So that's going to be the number of points on your collar. So this is the Motion Raceworks drive shaft speed sensor. So it's got 16 points. Put in your gear ratio, and then put in the diameter of your tire. So that should enable it to calculate the speed based on the rotations of the drive shaft. So then the big difference is you have a CAN settings button. So you'll come in here and select CAN IO module. I don't think that, yeah, there's no other option. So just right off the bat, click that. And then CAN channel is going to be based on what you chose or where you actually wired it. So like I said, the Holley diagram that comes with the module, and I'm sure it's on their website as well, it shows you input 1 through input 8 and what pins that actually goes into. So I put it into pin 13. That's input 1 on this drop down. And then you'll select CAN bus 1 or CAN bus 2. CAN bus 1 for this one because it's the only one that we got hooked up. CAN serial is, and I wish they would, to eliminate any confusion, I wish they would keep the nomenclature the same, but the sticker on the bottom of your CAN IO module box, ID number, and then it gives you a number. That's your serial number here, CAN serial. So mine says 0112. Type in 0112, it gets rid of the 0, it's 112. So that's good there. And then broadcast rate is going to be at what rate this sensor is going to show the data in. So if you have a speed sensor like what we're doing, I'm going to play around with this a little bit and see what the lowest refresh rate I can get away with and do what we want to do. But if we're going to be basing timing changes off of this and we're going to be doing it real down low and we want really fast information, then we're probably going to be jacking this up to like 100 hertz or something like that. We may talk more about this in a future video on what broadcast rate ends up working the best. But just right off the bat, I'm going to put 50 in here and just to see if it worked. That's pretty much it. It's not really that much more complicated than it is to wire in one of the regular sensors directly into the ECU. Just a little bit of additional steps. The only downside that I can see before actually getting into using it is the ECU pin here, because technically we're not going into the main ECU. It says undefined here. So we're not using the pin map and dragging in the sensor onto one of these inputs, and it doesn't have an option up here to show the CAN in and outs. So unfortunately, even though we have this pin defined via the CAN module, it doesn't show us. So I wish, hopefully maybe in a future update, they can put CAN and then input 1 or something like that. Just like these, like we have these coming in through the switches on the LCD screen. So that's via CAN as well. And it shows up which one we've actually chosen, LCD 1 through 5 or whatever. That'd be a nice thing, Holley, if you're listening. Be nice to do that. Just keeps you a little bit organized, I guess. But that's basically it for setup. And then what we ended up doing, I did a quick little log just to see make sure that it even worked. And so this is me just spinning the tire. I got a whopping 3 mile an hour out of it. Or no, wait, we went a little bit higher. Maybe we got 4 out of it. Let's see. Yeah, so 4 mile an hour. So yeah, I mean, it's working the way it's supposed to. Now this is like really, really magnified. So these little ledges here that we're seeing, maybe that's, you know, an indication that we need to go to a higher broadcast rate. We'll see. We'll put it at 100 hertz, see if it's any smoother. But this is like 3 mile an hour is the highest that we went, and it's zoomed in really far. If our highest mile an hour is like 160, then obviously this would be a much further out view of it. So we'll see. We'll play around with the broadcast rate. But okay, so I was talking a second ago about wiring up the power and the ground for a sensor via the CAN IO module itself. So there's 2 ways, as far as I can tell, that you can do that. I'll play around with this a little bit in the future, but the way I can see it right now is the simplest way is to just use one of the pre-designated input or outputs for sensor ground and 5-volt power that are displayed in the diagram that comes with the box. So Holley already provided a couple of outputs for 5-volt sensor power, like pin 5 on the pinout is 5-volt sensor power. Pin 12 is an example of sensor ground. What I am assuming, without checking it just yet, is that those are always ground and always power out of those ports. But if you want to set up, if you want to use one of your outputs to ground one of your sensors, let's say, for example, so one thing that I can think of is if you're powering something, if you got a sensor that you don't want to just be, you know, sitting on all the time. If you got a bunch of sensors, like a wheelie sensor or something like that, they don't draw a whole lot of power. But for example, like a wheelie sensor, a laser sensor, you don't really want it on all the time if you're not going to be using it. And especially if you're sitting with key on for a long time while you're looking at stuff or you're changing stuff about the tune. The only thing that I can think of is something like that, to where it's only on when let's say the engine itself is running. So like no point in it being on just sitting there. And so you can just configure an output by coming in here, going to inputs and output, going to outputs. And let's say we're doing the front wheel speed, but imagine this is a wheelie sensor, and you select CAN ground. So your options are CAN PWM or CAN ground. So you can control a solenoid off of this, or you can ground something with one of those outputs. And so if you come over to configure, same sort of thing with the CAN menu. Just select all of your appropriate, the serial number, the broadcast rate. If it's something that you're just literally turning on and off, or you know, you're just going to be grounding pretty much all the time, it doesn't have to be a huge broadcast rate. You can just set it to 1 hertz. So you're not logging a bunch of crap in your log. Your log files don't need to be unnecessarily larger. So put that at a pretty low refresh rate. And then you select whatever output that you've wired it to. Look at your diagram for that. Whatever output you've selected, make sure you select it here. And then the triggers themselves. So for example, this. I don't want to power, let's say, a wheelie sensor while it's just sitting there, especially if my battery voltage is starting to drop. So I set this threshold, just select 1, come in here and select battery voltage. So I say this sensor is going to be, this output is going to be sending ground as long as voltage is above 11.5 volts. If it drops below that, it turns that port off. There's just no reason to be, having that sensor on if voltage is starting to get low. Same thing that you can do is, for example, like the wheelie sensor that you don't want just sitting there, you can set this to RPM and then just say anything above 400 RPM. So while you're cranking, it's going to be cranking at like 400 RPM, and you consider a start, anything above 400 RPM. So while the car is running, it's going to be grounded, and this output will be working. But when you turn the car off, you could be key on. It's not going to be powering that sensor, so you're not draining power unnecessarily. Now keep in mind, the outputs, you need to make sure whatever you're sending this to directly is going to be less than 2 amps. These ports will not handle anything above 2 amps. So if it is above 2 amps, you can still use this ground, but you'll have to use it to trigger a relay. and then the relay is going to be sending what actual power. So if you're using it for like a secondary fuel pump or something like that, you're going to be using this just to trigger a relay. It doesn't take hardly anything to run a relay, but that fuel pump may be running at like 30 amps, 40 amps or something like that. So you definitely don't want to go direct to that. You will burn up a port like I did, which is why I need this input output. So far so good. That was actually really easy install, and we already got one sensor reading appropriately. So before we got this module, we had that speed sensor reading normally. So we knew the sensor worked and everything. So yeah, this was really a quick operation. Now, we'll get the front wheel speed sensor working, and we'll start doing some tests on refresh rate and things like that. And we'll obviously put that in an upcoming video, but hopefully this helped with, I know a lot of people are starting to get them in, and yeah, hopefully it's as straightforward for you guys as well. Just remember always to use a really good ground wherever you put that. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions as far as what you'd like for us to test, if anything specific. We're gonna be doing front wheel speed, rear wheel speed. We'll probably activate some lights. I'm thinking of activating a reverse light. So we put a reverse light in just recently, but it's just on a switch. But I'm thinking about actually putting it on the trans brake button so that we know while I'm backing up, I have to use the trans brake button, and that light helps whoever's lining me up in my own rubber be able to see when it's really dark. So another thing that we want to use it for is I kind of want to set up an LED light in the back to also come on whenever traction control is enabled. So kind of gives you an indication, like if somebody's watching you from behind. I mean, we'll see it in the log and everything. I just think it's kind of cool, like in people's videos, you know, if you make a nice clean pass and, you know, somebody's like, oh, well, he has traction control, that's why, you know, it made that pass. I'm gonna put a light so that it shows if traction control is retarding any timing at all, it's gonna send an output to a light that shines in the back. And so then when we're looking at somebody else's video, we're looking at one of my videos, I could be like, look, that pass was completely clean. We guessed it right, traction control wasn't enabled. And then the inverse of that, it'll show people when, you know, we are struggling with the surface, and you can see that thing going in and out, trying to wrangle in the traction. So I don't know, it's nothing necessary. I mean, I guess when you have all of these inputs and outputs, we're not used to it because we don't have a dominator or something like that. But now that this input output module allows us to, you know, do little things like that. Yeah, we'll see. I'm pretty excited to dig into it some more and, you know, see how long it lasts, see how durable it is, and how quickly it communicates with the ECU. To make these quick changes that we need from, you know, sensors that we use for traction control. So yeah, you'll see some more in the next video. So until then, just make sure to like, share, subscribe. Check out the join feature. There's some exclusive videos that you can see only when you're a member, and all members or above a certain level of members get to see videos early, and you get a bunch of cool emotes to use in chat. So I guess we'll see you on the next one then. Oh, and before we go, again, huge shout out to Zeth at Dirt Floor Fab. Go check out his channel. You know, the car guys are some of the nicest people in the world, man. Like, he lent us his module. He didn't have to, but he knew we were trying to get it going quickly. So yeah, thanks again, man.